Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. And camp is upon us. Has started for many college football teams. Is about to start for many other college football teams. You get 25 practices, I think, right, Landis? Is that correct here in the preseason before you get to a number a lot of coaches have thrown around. 25. We got 25 of these. Brett Bielema was up in front of the team. We got 25 of these things.
I think it's 29 technically leading up to your first game, but 25 until that first game week. Yeah.
So we are going to start running through, like, we're ready to talk ball now. So we're going to start talking ball. What's up with these teams? We are doing one last thing, though. If you did not watch the previous Kings of the North, we welcomed Kansas and Kansas State officially to KOTN, which brings our number of teams to 28. But we also want to have a little bit of a conversation. We've been having it for a while, Bill, since KOTN started, about these Pac-12 teams that are coming to the Big Ten / the Big 12 / to the North. So we have 4 former Pac-12 teams that we count among our northern teams: Colorado and Utah in the Big 12, and Washington and Oregon in the Big 10. And of course, we know that UCLA and USC exist. They just happen to be in California. So on this show, we also want to talk about welcoming the West to the North. And to do that, we do have 2 guests coming up. We have Yogi Roth. He's like Mr. Pac-12, which is like, man, that's like a tough thing when you're a Mr. something and then the something ceases to exist. But he is a dynamic man of the world who is going to be a Big Ten network announcer now. He has his own thing that he has started called Y Option, which is a podcast. It's a Substack. And so he's like the king of the West. And I thought he was the perfect guy to talk to, Landis, about integrating the West into the North, which we must do.
Yeah, which is like happening with Yogi, because he is of the West, but being like sort of integrated into Big Ten networks coverage this fall. So like he's going to be around Ohio State and Indiana and Penn State and Rutgers and all those teams. So very unique perspective from him. But no doubt about it, he is an expert on these 4 teams that we are welcoming in to our little collection of teams here.
So good conversation with Yogi. And then we had Andy Yamashita, who covers Washington for the Seattle Times. He's also a Washington grad. So he has a good handle on sort of where the minds of Washington fans are right now, coming off a national championship game appearance, losing their head coach to Alabama, changing conferences. I think it is the greatest shift from one season to the next for any team in college football that I can ever remember. To change your conference, lose your head coach, have 10 plus guys go to the NFL draft, a bunch of others transfer. Like, they're returning starters you can count on one hand, and you probably won't use all your fingers. I think it might be 2. And it's awesome for what Washington fans had an unbelievable season last year. And now everything has changed. So we had to talk to a Washington person to say, like, how are Washington fans doing, right? Because I hope they have great memories, but this one's going to be a little goofy this season.
It's kind of unbelievable what has happened out there. Not even from last year to this year, but like over the last 4 or 5 years, when you think about like the Chris Peterson, the Jimmy Lake stuff, to like getting Kalen DeBoer and that rise, and now this reset with Jed Fish. It is among the most fascinating stories I remember in my time, like paying attention to college football. And I know there's a lot of people wondering what exactly that might mean for Washington in terms of a step back, and then sort of like long term, what can Jed Fish kind of rebuild there? Because it is a rebuild. You don't necessarily think that all the time about a team coming off a national championship game berth, but that is definitely a position that Washington is in, and it's going to be exciting to follow it. But I'd imagine for Washington fans, they feel a little kind of caught in between of exactly how they should feel about their program at the moment. So I'm glad Andy can offer some perspective on that.
They were picked 10th in our preseason KOTN poll, and there were a decent amount of Washington fans on Twitter who were mad about that. I thought it was disrespectful, and it's like, first of all, it's 18 teams, so 10th is not so bad, but also go out and prove everybody wrong. But I think it's hard to look at Washington right now and not see it as a complete rebuild. It doesn't mean they're not going to be good, but they just don't. There's a lot of new guys working their way through that program right now, including the entire staff. So a good Washington conversation. And Bill, you and I will have an Oregon conversation. I have some numbers. I'm I actually think like the timing is perfect on this for Oregon. Like Oregon is ready for this. They have, I think, coincidentally risen to the challenge that if you were going to look at the history of Oregon and say, when would you want them to join the Big Ten? I think you might say this is the perfect year.
Mhm.
So we'll have an Oregon conversation because their fans are probably a little bit upset that they lost to Washington twice last year. They felt like they were a national title contender. It didn't happen, but they're geared up for this. Washington's like, oh man, I don't know. Oregon's like, let's go.
Mhm.
Don't you think like they're going to be great in the Big Ten? I think.
Yeah, they are on opposite sides of that spectrum. I think where Washington fans, while upset about where they were picked, I'm sure many of them are wondering exactly how they fit into this thing. And Oregon is like, what do you mean? How do we fit in? We're coming to win the Big Ten this year. So very different for sure.
Oregon's like, do you have any rivers in the Midwest? Because if you do, we're going to put our duck in it. And if they are just, man, watch out. If you live near a river,
yeah,
there might be a duck in it right now, an Oregon duck.
Did you see the duck? The duck was at Nebraska camp.
Did he crash Matt Rule's news conference? Like, I initially saw reports of the duck being in Nebraska, and I was like, the duck is invading Nebraska. And then I saw the duck hugging the Cornhusker, and I was like, oh, the duck was a guest of the Cornhusker. It's all good.
Yeah, I think Nebraska's being too nice.
Oh,
they need to not welcome the duck to the first day of Cornhusker camp. I don't think they crashed it, right? Even if they did crash it, someone had to let the duck in.
Someone
let the duck in. Yeah, they shouldn't have done that.
I don't think a duck does a duck have thumbs? A duck can't open a door, right? A duck would just be like with its wing being like, I can't. So
yeah,
a friendly Cornhusker invited the duck in. Like I'm all here for it. The Big Ten needs this, and we talked about like the Big Ten needs some juice, and Oregon's bringing it. But before we get to that, ball is here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a reminder to people, you can start right like 30 days, I think, before your first game is when you can have your first practice. I think that's right. So a couple of our teams here in the North, we have 28 teams in the North, started camp early this week because they're playing early. So I've already made charts of when our games are. And so I'm just reminding people because Bill and I are going to have we have a lot of football to watch this season. So week 1, you and I have 27 games to watch for our 28 teams because only 2 of our teams play each other, and it's West Virginia, Penn State. And everybody else is playing a team that is not technically part of KOTN. So strap in, tell your families. I'll tell I'm not going to see you. But the good thing is it's dispersed a little bit that first weekend. We have 6 Thursday games, 2 Friday games, 6 noon games, Eastern, 7 midday games, 5 primetime games, and 1 Monday game because Boston College and Florida State play on Monday. So the teams that play their first games on Thursday or Friday started camp this Monday or Tuesday this week. So we're going to lean on those teams a little bit here because there's just like a little more information out there as we record this on Wednesday afternoon. The 8 teams in the North that are playing on Thursday or Friday: Utah, Kansas, Colorado, Rutgers, Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota, and Michigan State. So we're going to do little camp peek-ins on those 8 teams. And then Notre Dame started on Wednesday and felt like a lot, right? You kind of noted that, oh my goodness, Notre Dame's got some stuff to talk about already. So we're going to talk about Notre Dame too. But everybody else either just started Wednesday or is starting Thursday, and we'll get to them because we got a month.
Yeah. When does Notre Dame open?
Notre Dame opens with Texas A&M, right?
Yeah, but I was surprised that they had started on Wednesday because I thought that was like a normal Saturday game.
Yeah, it is. Right? It is. They're away. They're one of the few Northern teams that's away. Yeah, they're at 7:30 prime time at Texas A&M. Yeah. But maybe we have the rules wrong. But anyway, I don't know. Yeah, it's fine. They got started. They're fine.
That's fine. They're rolling. Yeah.
So let's start with a couple of our teams that have been going now for a day or 2 or 3. And we're going to open with 2 teams actually that I think have a lot in common as camp starts, which is Utah and Kansas. And the stories here for Utah and Kansas, Bill, are they have veteran injured quarterbacks, previously injured, now healthy quarterbacks who have been around And everybody just wants to see them on the field ready to go.
Yeah.
And that's Cam Rising at Utah and Jalen Daniels at Kansas. And that felt like sort of the thing that everybody was talking about when those two teams started camp.
Yeah, it was cool to like just see. I know we saw it in the spring and we saw him play in the spring game, but it was nice to be reminded, I guess, about like Cam Rising's return and like see him in a video that the Utah football program tweeted out earlier this week. I'm trying to think. Those two are probably in the top 5 of quarterbacks I'm most excited to watch this year, only because we know how good they are, right? We've seen the flashes sort of their ceilings, but Cam Rising, it feels like it's been forever since he's played a game, and it just feels like Jalen Daniels has terrible luck and they can't get through a whole season to kind of put a complete body of work together. But both of them, and probably more so Jalen Daniels, because he offers you kind of the dual threat element that Cam Rising can move around, but that's not really his calling card. Like Jalen Daniels, a fully healthy Jalen Daniels playing an entire season for a Kansas team that's going to be in the hunt for a Big 12 title potentially is, I think, very much like a Heisman Trophy dark horse if he can put some stuff together. So very excited that both of those guys are seemingly on track to be ready to roll at the start of this season, because it felt like not that long ago that wasn't a guarantee.
Fascinating Big 12 quarterback stories. Cam Rising, Jalen Daniels, Avery Johnson as a young guy at Kansas State. We love Rocco Becht at Iowa State. We love Garrett Green at West Virginia. Obviously, Shedeur Sanders at Colorado is a Heisman candidate and projected to be a very high NFL draft pick. Noah Fafita at Arizona has a lot of people excited. This is going to be a really good quarterback league this year. And
it's the best quarterback league.
It's the best. I think you said it. I'll agree with it.
Yeah.
But if you're Kansas and Utah, if these guys don't stay healthy, there goes that.
Yeah. Yes. We've seen Kansas find ways to make it work, right? Yeah. But yeah, it's like to ask a team to do that over and over again is pretty challenging.
When you talk about a Utah team that was picked to win the Big 12 and a Kansas team that was picked 4th in a competitive conference, it's not the best quarterback in the Big 12 won't necessarily be on the best team, but man, that's a good path, right? If there is somebody who just goes absolutely crazy this year, any of the guys that I just named, that team may suddenly become the favorite in the Big 12. And I think especially, I don't know that like Cam Rising, it's a little more because he was practicing a year ago, but then he wound up never playing coming off the knee injury. I think there's more like relief maybe with Utah and Cam Rising. I know Lance Leipold, I was watching his news conference after the first day of practice, and he was just talking about that he feels like there's energy that Jalen Daniels is bringing to Kansas because he's so grateful to be out there that everybody's like, that's our leader. That's our guy. We're grateful he's here. He's grateful he's here. Like, I think there's some juice around Kansas. They have new locker rooms. They're redoing their stadium. Like, there is a lot of, if he stays healthy, I think there may be a propulsive effect with Kansas that they might just get shot out of a cannon. They have an easy opener, and then they play Illinois in week 2. They might get shot out of a cannon and never stop, never slow down if Jalen Daniels stays healthy. So like watching his progression through August is going to be a huge story.
Yeah, it is. And I think too, he's a guy, like we had these conversations around the time that you were at Big 12 Media Days about what can the Big 12 do to like capture more national attention. It's guys like Jalen Daniels like playing at the top of their game all year, because that is a guy that people are going to want to sit down in the living rooms and make sure they're watching because he's that dynamic. So hopefully he can put it together this year.
That's going to be great. We could do that in the preseason. Best quarterback matchups in the regular season across college football this year. There's a ton of northern ones, and there's a ton of them in the Big 12 because don't you want to see Avery Johnson and Jalen Daniels play each other when Kansas State and Kansas State play? Don't you want to see those guys go play Noah Fafita at Arizona? You know, any of these Big 12 quarterbacks matching up with Shedeur Sanders. Don't you want to see that? All right. Next team I want to talk about is also quarterback related. It's Michigan State. Michigan State started on Tuesday. Fired up about Aiden Childs, the Oregon State transfer, but it's something that came up with Jonathan Smith, and I read through his comments. There's a lot of generic stuff, a lot of generic questions, a lot of generic answers. But people, I think, did make note of the fact that he thought a couple receivers looked good on day one. And they have Montori Foster back at Michigan State, their leading receiver from a year ago. But he mentioned Jaron Glover, who's a third-year guy who was pretty good last year and got hurt at the end of the year. And then Nick Marsh, who is a top 200 national recruit from the state of Michigan, who picked the Spartans And by the way, Jaron Glover was in the portal at one point and then got out of the portal and stayed at Michigan State. He just mentioned both their names, and I think everybody around Michigan State got excited because if those two guys are ready to do something big and you add them to Foster, and now all the things everybody likes, we like about Aiden Childs, if he has some guys to throw it to, get Michigan State on my TV screen yesterday to see what this offense looks like.
Yeah, that was the one thing for me that was like holding me back, I guess, a little bit from wanting to project like anything grand for Michigan State this year, even though we like Jonathan Smith a lot. We like Aiden Childs a lot. I think asking, like, Aiden Childs is a true sophomore who's never been a full-time starting quarterback. So just like kind of throwing him out there and saying, okay, kid, go win us some games that no one's expecting us to win as we try to build this thing in year one. That's a really tough ask. So I'm glad to hear, obviously it's very early, but I'm glad to hear that people are stepping up around him because it felt like maybe it was going to be a whole lot of like Aiden Childs throwing the Jack Velling, and maybe you get Nate Carter, the running back, involved there as a passing weapon too. Like they needed receivers to emerge. And obviously they're going to need offensive linemen to emerge too to help protect Aiden Childs. But he is definitely the kind of quarterback, I think even now as a sophomore who's relatively inexperienced, can make an offense go, but you got to put stuff around them. So hopefully that carries through for Michigan State throughout their camp, and it's good the guys are popping early.
Yeah, we did our skill position rankings earlier, and like Michigan State wasn't really on our radar, but you think about Jack Villing as a transfer tight end, came with Jonathan Smith and Nate Carter at running back, and now you put three receivers out there with Aiden Childs. It's like, let's see what this looks like. And they become a team that is dangerous, right? Can they bite somebody? It doesn't mean that they're going to compete at the top of the Big Ten, but on a given Saturday, they may be very difficult to defend as these guys kind of mature together.
Yeah, and I think too, like they're going to be, no matter what the talent level ends up sort of being relative to the rest of the Big Ten, I think they're going to be like competently coached, right? So they're like that's always even like a modicum of talent, but competently coached and well prepared every week and properly motivated every week makes you dangerous every week, I think.
Michigan State opens on a Friday night against Florida Atlantic, by the way. Now Rutgers, talk about Rutgers. Rutgers opens on a Thursday night against Howard. I think, Greg Schiano was asked about Ethan Kaliak-Manis. I just think he is excited and eager. We had the interview with him from Big Ten Media Days to just be able to throw the ball down the field more consistently. And it felt like, it's the first practice, but what he wanted when he chose Ethan Kaliak-Manis in the spring, I think it seems like he at least got a glimpse of it on day one of Rutgers practice.
Yeah, I was surprised a little bit by how candid Greg Schiano was with his quarterback evaluations when he was talking to you at Big Ten Media Days. Like he could have just said like, we went through it and like we decided kind of Ethan was our guy and just sort of left it at that. He was like, no, we have to throw the ball more accurately and we have to throw it down the field. And he wasn't ragging on Gavin Wimsatt, but there was some criticism of the quarterback play last year layered into his endorsement of Ethan Kaliak-Manis as his team's quarterback. I still have questions about it because I was not super impressed by Ethan Kaliak-Manis last year, and perhaps it is just because of maybe Minnesota set the bar a little too high. So I'm willing to keep an open mind on that. I'm also trying to keep in mind that Rutgers has not had much in the way of good / competent passing game really since it's joined the Big Ten. So it doesn't take much for people to get excited. So I'm wondering what exactly the level of play is that's getting people excited in Piscataway at the moment, because it could just be kind of below average, and even that's better than what they're used to.
Yeah. People are getting on the Rutgers bandwagon.
I know.
Driving it, but I'm not the only one, right? I'm not the only one.
You're not. I saw so was it Kirk Herbstreit was out there with Rutgers?
I don't know. I know our guy Shahan on the College Football Survivor Show. I think they were talking about the teams that could crash the college football playoff, and Rutgers came up. So even I'm not there, but I think they're going to win some games.
Yeah, Kirk Herbstreit said Rutgers is a playoff dark horse.
What? I know doesn't want to hear my prediction, but I just wanted to get it out there. Remember who said it first, Greg?
That's right.
Wisconsin. They started practice on Tuesday. Got second practice in on Wednesday morning. They go to camp like a couple other schools do. UW Platteville, I believe. They're out there. Saw a lot of Luke Freckle talking about stuff. He was wearing a shirt after day one of practice that said, "Hunt or be hunted." That is the slogan for Wisconsin. And I like the acknowledgement because I felt like maybe there would have been a time where Wisconsin's slogan was more like stay in your lane, do what you do best.
Mhm.
Don't overextend yourself, right?
Yeah.
But in this modern Big Ten, I do think you're one or the other. We did a Big Ten West show. We're not going to do another Big Ten West show, but in the Big Ten West, for 10 years, you could hide. And Wisconsin didn't like not hide that I'm going to be eaten, but just hide of like, we're good. Like if you walk past me, maybe I'll eat you, but I'm not sure I'm going to chase you down.
Yeah.
And so in this world, that's exactly how Wisconsin should think. And I was trying to make sure I understood what Luke Fickell was saying. It sounded like there was a moment in practice where they started a practice period. He didn't think the offense was going fast enough or was playing with enough urgency. And they stopped and like restarted the period because he was like, we're not messing around here. And that was day one. So yeah, get out and hunt. I think a badger can hunt. Is a badger a carnivore? I'm not sure. Do you know?
That's a great question. Actually, I don't know. They have teeth, right? They got sharp teeth.
You know what a badger would eat? A badger would eat a duck.
Badger would eat a duck.
It floated by on the river, and the badger was on the banks of the river, and a duck floats by. It's gonna eat that duck, I think.
You know why I love this show? Because in the middle of it, I am prompted to just Google, is a badger a carnivore? Badgers are carnivorous mammals. Yes.
Yeah. Watch out. Take that. Watch out, Bama. You're coming north to face a carnivorous mammal. So do you I just like the attitude from Wisconsin.
Yeah.
That like it's year two, but they understand the stakes here.
It's reflective of the decision they made to hire Luke Fickell in the first place, right? Like they could have stayed in their Barry Alvarez lane with whoever they decided to get to replace Paul Christen, but that world no longer exists for them, and they knew that. So they went outside of their comfort zone, hired a very good coach in Luke Fickell. It wasn't like they took a risk necessarily on a head coach, but they went out there and they got a name. They got a guy who was on the rise, who people think can coach teams to playoff berths and championships. And if year one was kind of about resetting and getting your feet under you, then like year two should be about trying to meet that expectation in a more tangible way. So I love it. I don't know roster wise, like where exactly they are, like in terms of the ability to kind of answer that call, but I think this is the right time to kind of start reaching for it for sure.
Colorado, they started practice on Monday. They open on a Thursday against North Dakota State, which is a little bit of an interesting game. I know Deion Sanders at Big 12 Media Days was like, who scheduled this game? Why are you doing this? Because at least traditionally, North Dakota State's been a good team. Talk about running back depth. I know definitely saw things from Colorado coming out of that they basically completely redid their running back room, but it feels like they think they're in a better spot than they were a year ago. And I think that applies to a lot of things, the way Colorado is thinking right now, that yes, they have elite superstar players at a couple positions, but they had to do something about the middle of their roster. And that's continued to be part of the conversation as camp kicked off.
Yeah, I think that's where they need to grow, is probably like through the middle of their offense, probably through the middle of their defense too. But I'm very excited to see what Dallin Hayden does there. The transfer from Ohio State, who every time he played for the Buckeyes just looked pretty good, looked competent. There were a lot of questions about why he didn't play more at Ohio State, or why he redshirted last year at Ohio State as a sophomore who looked pretty good as a true freshman when called upon. So he should be getting a lot of action in that backfield. And obviously we have to know where the offensive line is, but it's always hard to rebuild through the portal. I don't think it's a long-term winning strategy, but there's always the opportunity that you get it right in a particular year. So we'll see how that offensive line starts to come together. But I think there's reason enough to be excited that the Colorado addressed its deficiencies last year. And there are a couple of individual players, and Dallin Hayden, I think, is pretty high on that list of guys who could break out, I think, in a pretty significant way and offer Colorado something different than it had last year.
And they're talking about it in a way like they want to use camp to figure out like who their two most reliable backs are going to be. So I think there's like real competition there, and some real options. We'll be curious to see how that all shakes out. The last two that have opened, both on Monday, Illinois and Minnesota. Illinois will open the season on a Thursday against Eastern Illinois. And then kind of the banger of some of those Thursday night openers, Minnesota opens against North Carolina. Yeah. So both those schools open on Monday. not a ton that I saw. I don't know that there was a ton of access to things. I did the one thing I saw for Illinois is that Dennis Briggs Jr., one of their transfers, a defensive lineman from Florida State, is going to miss at least the start of camp. Otherwise, Brett Bielema said he feels like Illinois is pretty healthy. But I mean, Minnesota, like this is a real opportunity against a North Carolina team that would be a good win, but isn't an insurmountable obstacle. And working in Max Brosmer as the transfer quarterback, like this is Minnesota's camp. It's like, who has the toughest openers in the North, right? It's like Boston College plays Florida State, and Notre Dame's going to play Texas A&M, and then West Virginia and Penn State are going to play each other. But like, other than that, Minnesota, Fresno State will be a little bit of a test, I think, for Michigan. But like, other than that, like playing North Carolina is like the real deal. So PJ Fleck has to get his dudes ready to go. I know they're having an open practice on Saturday night, inviting the fans to bring their oars to that, which is cool. Nice. But it's go time for the Gophers, like right now.
Yeah, an important season, I think, for PJ Fleck too, to show that last year was an aberration and an otherwise, pretty strong resume he's built thus far at Minnesota, and it is definitely a test. I know there's some thought that North Carolina, despite losing Drake May, like might be better because it's like more of like a sum of its parts situation. Like they're not going to be quite as good at quarterback, but I think of the rest of the roster may have elevated compared to last year, and that could maybe not make them so reliable on kind of a stud quarterback. So I think that'll be a good, pretty competitive game, but also a little bit of obviously a tone setter for Minnesota's season and where they want to go this year. So their camp, I would imagine, is more ratcheted up than most teams because they're coming out of the gate with a real one.
And then we wanted to throw Notre Dame in here because Notre Dame, as we mentioned, like they're playing a Saturday opener, but they got going on Wednesday morning, and you thought there was some like let's go energy immediately coming out of South Bend, right?
Yeah, there were a couple things. One was just like what's going on with Riley Leonard, and will he have any restrictions during this camp? And it sounded like from Marcus Freeman that he won't. After I don't think he participated much at all in spring. He had to kind of have a follow-up surgery after his injury at Duke last year, ankle injury. So he had some stuff he had to get cleaned up, but it sounds like he's ready to roll. Like I can't remember exactly what Marcus Freeman said, but I think he said like let it rip all summer or something like that. Yep. When asked about what Riley Leonard will be able to do during these practices. So that was good to hear. And then, but the thing that caught my attention more was what's going on their offensive line. Because I think that's probably the biggest question for Notre Dame is what are they going to do up front? And more specifically, what are they going to do at right tackle as that group changes over a little bit? And they have Charles Jagusah at left tackle, who I think it makes sense for him to kind of rise up and take that job. And then like Emil Wagner is the guy who opened camp on Wednesday as a starter. And Marcus Freeman said it's based off what we saw in spring and summer, like he kind of earned that. So he's the guy we're going to give him the shot to win that job right away to start. And he's kind of competing with Tosh Baker, who's a much older player, who's kind of been a backup tackle who has had to play in some big moments, started in their bowl game last year. And Emil Wagner's thing has always been, can he get to the right weight? I was close-ish to his recruitment when Ohio State was recruiting him. He's an Ohio kid. And he was like 260 pounds, I think, coming out of high school and just really struggled to put on weight. So Notre Dame has him listed at 290 now, which is still, I think, probably too light. The question with him was always like, can he get to 300 pounds or something more? But it sounds like Notre Dame's going to try him there anyway. So he was a highly rated recruit because of his athleticism. So if he's able to play at that weight and kind of sustain for an entire season and give them some more athletic upside at right tackle than they might have had otherwise, then maybe you start to feel a little bit better about what Notre Dame's doing up front.
And Notre Dame obviously replacing one of the better tackle combos in the country. Joe Alt at left tackle was a top 10 pick and Blake Fisher at right tackle. So if they get that figured out, they are going to be in the playoff race. All right, we're going to take a quick breath. That's sort of our camp opener. We just want to be doing a lot of this now. And we're going to be doing season predictions. We're going to be doing rankings, but we're also going to be just checking in on our teams constantly as we go through August here on Kings of the North. But what we want to do next is welcome the West. And that will start with Bill and I talking about Oregon next on Kings of the North. Back on Kings of the North, before we get started on our Western conversation, can I give you two pieces of information that I would like to pass along?
Yes.
So one is that the Saturday Down South show that I guested on recently is up. That went up on Wednesday. Connor O'Gara was a great, gracious host. I thought he and I had an interesting and fun conversation about the North and the South. I worried that I was too spicy and they were going to excise me from the show, but they let it in. And we'll have Connor back on Kings of the North down the line. But I want to fight the South with microphones. Like this is, I want us, you and I, because and they do a great job at Saturday Down South, but there's a lot of Southern shows, right? You could do something like that. I want us to be the only people in the North that when they say, can we fight the North? And it's like, it's Bill and Doug. There's nobody else to fight, right? We're okay with that. Fight us.
Yeah. We're okay with it. I was also glad that in their teaser tweet, I guess it was for the show, like they said the North needs us, which I'm assuming they were just echoing what you said, but like I was glad that they put that out into the world too.
Well, like what Connor said, the North needs a fine bomb.
Yeah.
He said that. And then I just went,
it's me.
Like, what do you mean? Like, what do you think we're doing here? So go listen to that and we'll have that. We're going to make that a regular part. We want to draw lines. We want to make comparisons between Northern and Southern football. And we want to have Southern people on to help us do that. So thanks to Connor for that invite. The other thing is, and I normally would save this for like a what you watching, what you eating, what you thinking. But this just happened and I can't contain my excitement. I must share the news. My daughter and I were recently on a quick trip to England. And are you familiar with the TikTok, Bill? You've been on the TikTok?
I am on the TikTok.
So there's there's always things on TikTok where there's like a voiceover or like a clip from a song. And then it's like, hey, everyone's doing a dance or a different thing to this particular audio clip, right? That's what people do. So there was one about London. There's a song that has London Bridge in it. I don't know what it is. So my daughter, one of the things she wanted to do on this trip was like do the video because someone famous had done a video at a certain spot. It's actually not actually on London Bridge. It's on a different bridge, but it's the bridge right in front of Big Ben. So it's like, it's a London Bridge. So anyway, she was like, let's do this video. So she put me at the beginning of the video and I had to mouth a swear word. And then she's at the end of the video. And today that TikTok video crossed the 1 million view threshold.
Oh my God. 1 million?
My entire professional life is currently centered on trying to get people on the internet to watch what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I stood on a bridge and went, and it got 1 million. And there was one comment in there. Someone did comment like Kings of the North. And I was like, all right, really? 1 out of 1 million people know what is going on here. But like, we've been tracking it. I said like last week, do you think we'll get to 1 million? Do you think we'll get to 1 million? She's like, I don't know. We're kind of slowing down. But she's very excited. And it is the most successful piece of media that I have ever been involved with. And it's just mouthing a swear word on a bridge.
Yeah. You need to go back in and like put a promo for Kings of the North in there.
I should have been wearing Kings of the North merch from head to toe at the time. It was a missed opportunity. Yeah. I did not realize the power of that little audio clip. So anyway,
I'm going to go find it later. I'm excited to go watch it.
It's only downhill from here. Okay, let's talk about welcoming the West to the North. And I do not think there is a downside to Oregon being in the Big Ten instead of the Pac-12. I cannot think of a downside. Do you think there's a downside?
For Oregon, no. for the Pac-12, I can think of one. The fact that it no longer exists.
Yeah.
But no, as it pertains to Oregon, no, and as it pertains to the Big Ten, no.
I just think, and it's one of those things that the Pac-12 had a long history, and we don't want to give short shrift to that. But I think when you think about Colorado, Utah, and then Arizona and Arizona State, who we don't care about, like I just they slide right in to the Big 12. I don't think there's not even a speed bump on any of that, right? Do you agree with that general idea?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's right.
So that's 4 of the former Pac-12 that are like great. And then I think Washington and Oregon slide right into the Big Ten. I do not think there is much of a speed bump here, and I have mileage in a second to talk about. So that's half the former Pac-12 that I think is the same, if not better, than where they were being in the Pac-12. So then it becomes a conversation about, I feel terrible. Not I. We all, it's horrible what happened to Washington State and Oregon State. And I hope they land on their feet in a way that their fans are happy, their athletic departments can thrive. And that probably is being like a Boise State type team in the G5, which we've talked about. And I think we both believe. So, okay, them. USC and UCLA, like the Big Ten's a good place to be. They're just in Southern California. And it's, I think, slightly less, maybe a lot less of a cultural fit. But I don't know, like people in Los Angeles, like nobody's from there. Everybody moved there anyway. Like they're going to the beach during football season. Like if USC or UCLA is good, I think it'll be fine. I just think it might be a little bit, it's, the idea that USC and UCLA were coming first and then Washington and Oregon were like, okay, we'll come too because our conference is exploding. It's like, actually, I think Oregon and Washington make more sense. So there's, I think, more of an adjustment for USC and UCLA, but they have the beach, they'll be fine. And like, they're only honorary Northern members, so we don't care as much. And then Cal and Stanford, I don't know what to say.
I don't know either. they are, I think, in a little bit of a rough spot. Yeah.
So I don't think they're in the ACC long term. It's a good landing spot for now. Like, who knows? I don't know. I actually think like if they wind up in a conference back with Washington State and Oregon State, that includes Fresno State and Colorado State and some of those, San Diego State, some of those other teams like that. I think there's a way forward for a collective Western type conference that is not as prestigious athletically as the Pac-12, but like I think they're in a no man's land right now. And also, we at least got one comment of like we added Kansas and Kansas State. We should add Cal and Stanford to the north. No,
California is not in the north.
No, I don't. And I can show you like latitudinally. Again, this is latitudinally we're on the right path here, but also just like they're fine. It's California. They're practically a separate country. Like they're fine. Right. Like they're not. They're not. It's like you're like, oh, who I love in the north? Minnesota, Rutgers, and Cal. Those are my three favorite northern teams. That's not a normal. A person wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
So anyway, Oregon specifically. So like logistically on this, I looked at Oregon's schedule in 2022 and 2023, the previous 2 years, and then their football schedule this year and next year in the Big Ten, right? So they played 11 road games in the previous 2 years. There were only 2 of those road games that were actually like close, right? 2 of those 11, Oregon State and Washington. Like that you could hop in your car from campus and it's like an easy drive, right? So now in this year and next year, they're going to play 10 road games and there's still only 2 games that are close. And it's the same 2. It's Oregon State and Washington. So I think it's super important for Oregon and Oregon State to maintain that rivalry. And it's super important for Washington and Washington State to maintain their geographical non-conference rivalry now. Must be maintained. But basically what happened is Oregon traded some 8 to 12 hour drives for its fans for plane trips because nobody was close to Oregon then and nobody is close to Oregon now. The previous 2 years, 2022 and 2023, the third closest road trip for them was 520 miles to Cal and then 560 miles to Stanford. Those are both 8-hour drives. Actually, they also 460 miles to Washington State, but you got to go over the mountains. That's 7 hours. So that's a 7-hour drive, 2 8-hour drives, and a 12-hour drive to Utah. But they're not easy. They're not simple, let's go down the road. And then everything else is a flight. So now, the next 2 years, they're going to play 10 road games, 2 you can drive to, and you're going to have 8 flights. So you went from 2 easy drives, 4 pain in the neck, can't we just fly drives, and 4 flights, to 2 drives and 8 flights. So like from that standpoint, I just don't think it's that big of a deal. And it's easy for me to say I'm not an Oregon fan who has to do it, but I'm not sure how many Oregon fans were like, woohoo, let's pile in the car and drive to Cal this weekend. Is that a big thing? Do you think they were doing that?
I don't think they were doing that. I think it's more about the players themselves, right? Because I would imagine, I don't know this offhand, I would imagine the flight from Oregon to Phoenix, Arizona is not all that much shorter than the flight from like Portland to Columbus, Ohio. Maybe it's like a difference of like an hour or two, but with one you're staying in the same time zone, and then the other one you're crossing three. So like
Yeah.
that is, I think, an issue that needs to be discussed more if you want to just talk pure distance. Like it's body clocks and time zones, I think, complicate things rather significantly.
No, I think that's right. I don't time zones. Yeah, this sort of came up at Big Ten Media Days that it really is a time zone conversation. And I don't know. I will be curious. I think a rule that no West Coast Big Ten team can ever play a noon Eastern start on a road trip. I mean, they wouldn't play it at their own thing, but no West Coast team should ever play at noon Eastern. And that takes them off the big noon calendar. But like maybe that's the price of doing business, Fox. Sorry. You
Right.
don't get Oregon, Michigan at noon because we're not going to make the Duck players play a game at 9:00 in the morning on their body clock. Like, I think that would be a reasonable trade-off because that probably is the biggest deal, right?
Yeah, I think it would be too. And I know when Oregon went to Ohio State in 2021, they played that game at noon. It was a big deal at the time. I don't know. Did they make USC play a noon game one time too? Fox, maybe. But I think you could avoid it. I know Fox wants to own that time slot, but I do think it would probably be fairer to the West Coast teams if you didn't make them play 9 a.m. body clock games.
And it's one of those things like ESPN has done this traditionally. Like you can have your pregame show and everything be there, but then it's not at noon. That game is not at noon.
Yeah, just play at 3:30
right?
or play at
Just
night.
play at 3:30. That's a very reasonable trade-off. We can ask about that. That should be a rule. But I don't think overall, and again, no offense to the players and the coaches who make all this possible, but like we're interested in, I'm more concerned with the fans. And I don't think it's a killer for the fans because it wasn't that convenient to begin with.
Mhm.
And now from a fan standpoint, the previous 2 years, 2022 and 2023, Oregon played 13 home games. These were their 3 best home games. Washington, Utah, and USC. These were the other 10 home games that Oregon fans paid to see in 2022 and 2023. Portland State, Hawaii, Colorado, Washington State, Cal, Oregon State, Eastern Washington, BYU, Stanford, and UCLA. That blows.
Well, Oregon State's a rivalry at least.
No,
they were good. Yeah.
But they're going to keep playing Oregon State. So keep playing Oregon State.
Yeah.
But like you are playing a bunch of Colorado, Cal, BYU, Stanford, UCLA kind of stuff that like, how is that appealing? No offense to those programs. These are their home games over the next 2 years. They're going to play 14 home games and 10 road games this year and next. They get Ohio State at home. They have Washington at home. They have Oklahoma State coming in a non-conference at home. They get USC at home, and they get Wisconsin at home. They're also playing Idaho, Boise State, Michigan State, Illinois, Maryland, Montana State, Oregon State, Indiana, and Minnesota. So I think, and that is like Penn State's not coming in the next 2 years. Michigan's not coming in the next 2 years. Nebraska's not coming in the next 2 years. Like there's going to be better things. The home games overall, when you are a season ticket holder for Oregon, you're going to look at the schedule, I think, going forward year to year, and you're going to think you are getting more bang for the buck for your season ticket. And when you go on the road, the only thing you'll be missing is long drives that have turned into flights. I think that's a good trade-off from a fan perspective, and Oregon fans will be good.
I think it is too. Obviously, it'll require some adjustment, like just getting familiar with the teams that are going to be coming to Eugene. But that happened. I think that'll happen rather quickly as they're more ingrained into the Big Ten footprint. So I would rather have this situation that Oregon is currently in than what it has been in the Pac-12. If the only thing you're thinking about is like the quality of football game that you get to watch on a more regular basis, for sure.
So now let's talk about like the football on the field, what this means for Oregon. In the playoff era, here's where Oregon finished in the college football playoff rankings going into the postseason. Obviously, in 2014, they made the national title game. They were the number 2 team in the final playoff rankings. In 2015, they were 15th. Then they were out, 6th in 2019. 25th, 14th, 15th, and 8th last year. So they had 3 seasons in 2015, 2021, and 2022 where they would have been right on the edge of a 12-team playoff discussion. They were 9-3, 10-3, and 9-3 in those 3 years. I think being in the Big Ten in similar situations will help them. And so I think they will be aided by the Big Ten, but also to think that this was a program in 2016 that went 4-8 and in Mark Helfrich's last year, and then went 7-5 and 8-4 the next 2 years in the regular season, and to think where they are now. If you were trying to explain to Oregon fans back then of like, okay, the conference is going to die, you're going to go play, you're going to have to play in the same league with Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State and all these teams, and it's like, what is happening? But now, again, it's not coincidental because all of this drastic change in college football is related. The portal is related to NIL, and NIL is related to realignment and all these different things. But in the modern world, Oregon is positioned to be a powerhouse. And if you are going to be positioned to be a powerhouse, I would rather be in the current Big Ten than the previous Pac-12. Even though you might have run roughshod, I think you have nobody to be scared of in the Big Ten. I'm not saying that means they're the best program, but there's no one you're scared of that like we can't hang with them. And it gives you absolutely every opportunity to show how good you are. You take a couple losses, that's fine. You're still in. The moment is ripe and right for Oregon to be making this move.
Yeah, I think maybe the thing we don't consider enough when we talk about teams kind of in those terms is what is around you to help prop you up if you end up slipping, right? And I just think like in the Pac-12, but there have been some good Pac-12 seasons, competitive Pac-12 seasons, probably a better way to put it. But I just don't think you can rely upon that on a year-to-year basis. Like if you end up slipping, dropping a game or two, that's going to look much better, I think, more consistently in the Big Ten than it would have had you stayed in the Pac-12. And I guess the counter to that would be like, well, we wouldn't lose those games in the Pac-12. It's like, yeah, you might, and then you don't want to be on the outside looking in of a 12-team playoff if that's the case. So I do think Oregon is situated to be competitive in the Big Ten, like financially, football wise, infrastructure, support, all that stuff, but also better situated with the support that the Big Ten can give it as it tries to, I think probably carve out a new place for itself, like in the college football hierarchy. I know it's a program that's been talked about a lot because they were once like the cool, trendy program, and I don't think ever fell too far from people. But I don't think people have really ever talked about Oregon in terms of being a year after year kind of championship contender. And I think that Oregon wants to be that, and I think the Big Ten will kind of help get them there.
And you hosted the interview when Minnesota kicker Dragan Kesic was talking with us, and Terrence Ferguson, the Oregon tight end, was dropped on your head, and you conducted a wonderful co-interview of those two guys. I just think that Oregon, I'm not going to pretend to completely know Oregon fans and Washington fans right now. Andy's going to talk to us about how Seattle as a major urban center does love Washington football. It's like, okay, well, like this is kind of a more than any other conference, the Big Ten has some like big city teams, right? Rutgers claims that like they're New York City's team, and Northwestern claims that they're Chicago's team, and Minneapolis is a real city for Minnesota. And like there are, all right, if you're Washington and you're a big city, okay, there's some people in the Big Ten that you can talk to. And then Oregon, again, like I hope that an Oregon fan could sit down next to an Iowa fan or a Nebraska fan or a Wisconsin fan or an Indiana fan or a Minnesota fan and like have something to talk about. Right. Yeah. I don't know why that Oregon fan would have more in common with an Arizona State fan. Right.
I don't think they would. Yeah.
With these people in the top half of the country. So again, like culturally, it's not exactly the same, but I think there's enough commonality for Oregon fans to be like, yeah, we get these people. We're good. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's going to work across the board, and it's too bad you can't smush the country. It's a big country.
It is.
You know, yeah. Imagine if America was the size of like Switzerland. You know, we'd just be like, you know, it'd be like, oh no, I have to drive an extra 45 minutes to get to my football game.
Yeah. Well, if we could have an adequate train system too, maybe to get us from
that'd be great.
campus to campus.
We just need a hyperloop. In like 100 years, when we have a hyperloop throughout the whole country, and it's like I can get from Oregon to Minnesota in like 90 minutes. I'm good. What are you talking about? This is no big deal.
We need to apply for a federal loan to make the KOTN hyperloop that just connects all 28 of our schools.
Oh, we'll get Mike working. We'll get Mike working on the graphic for us to send to the Department of Transportation.
Yeah.
Dear Department of Transportation, DOT. Hey, DOT, it's KOTN. Can you make this train loop for us? It would really help our show. I got 1 million views on TikTok, if that means anything. That would be the case for the Hyperloop. All right. Any other thoughts about Oregon or Washington and also Utah and Colorado? We're not ignoring Utah and Colorado fans. I just think it's an easier adjustment. Like they're not as long-term traditional for 100 years Pac-12 teams. So like they've kind of been on the move. Like they were good. This almost gets back to their roots. It's tougher. The roots were deeper, much deeper for Washington and Oregon fans, but I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, no, I don't really have anything else to add to it. I do find it. I find it interesting how Oregon is sort of coming into this conference puffing out its chest a little bit. While like USC is coming to it like crying poor for some reason. UCLA is coming into it seemingly a little unsure of whether or not it belongs here. And Washington just has so much transition that I don't even know if it's fully landed yet that they're in the Big Ten, to be honest. But Oregon is a disruptive presence in this league. And I think that's good because I think you want Oregon to be that, but I am curious how they will be received as they make their way around the Big Ten, given that they're just kind of so out there with their expectations in this league.
All right, get ready for interviews with Yogi Roth of Y Option and Andy Yamashita of the Seattle Times as we welcome the West to the North on KOTN. Joined now by Yogi Roth, the king of the West Coast. And Yogi, you are here because there's not a better person to help us get inside the minds of fan bases. Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, Utah, Colorado, Arizona State, all these fan bases who have been forced. They didn't ask for this. They've been forced to embrace this new world. You're a man of the people. How do you think Pac-12 fans are doing right now? Are they okay or are they confused?
It's a fair question. I think today when I talk to people and yesterday here that are from the respective schools, the common quote was, "This is just weird."
Yep.
Now, fans, I think when you look at your schedule and you're like, this is kind of cool. This is exciting. I think there's some of that. But I also think there's some nostalgia when they're like, we're going to play UCF and you're a Utah fan, or Cincinnati and you're an Arizona school. I think that is like, well, we're not playing SC. We're not playing UW. So I think there's a little bit of everything, to be honest. That's probably how the season will go. What I hope doesn't happen is apathy sets in and it's like, well, I don't want to go to that game, but I'll go to that game. Like, no, you want to support your team in this unique transition in sports. So I hope fans do that. I'm optimistic that they will, because that's what the teams deserve. Because I look at it from this lens. The 200 employees of the Pac-12 that got let go, this was no fault of theirs.
Mm-hmm.
This was at the very top. And the schools and the fans, it's no fault of theirs either. So throw down on what you love, which is the game and the craft and the players and the team.
Why would we live in the past? You are a very upbeat person. You embrace life as it comes. But let's live in the past for a moment.
Let's go there. Therapy time.
Did it have to go down this way? And like the thing that, like I've asked this in the Big Ten, of is there a world where, you know what I mean? Like leadership's a little different. The dice roll is a little bit different. And maybe it's a different conference that broke apart and is now joining the Pac-12. You know what I mean? Like, did it have to be this way? Was the Pac-12 in some way more vulnerable than other conferences? Or was it bad luck / bad leadership / somebody had to take the fall? Why did it go down like this?
Well, there's a whole film to be made, to be honest.
You're the man to make it.
I'm the man to make it. That's on the list for sure. When I look at this, I look at it through a bunch of lenses, right? Yes, Larry Scott, George Kliavkoff were at the table and leading the conversation. But you can't not place some blame on USC and UCLA. They hadn't won, right? Like if USC is winning in football, this league is probably thriving, much like Clemson 5 years ago rolling in the ACC. If UCLA hoops is rolling, like it's a different conversation, I think. I think the way that they departed impacted it. Like, whoa, how did that happen in the middle of the night? I think that when you talk to athletic directors, they were always in those rooms. It was in front of one another. They were together, but there was really no trust there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you add all that up, and then the era we're in college athletics, which is driven by media rights and money. And I think college football is about the fans and the players, not the media and the money.
What? Didn't know that. I thought everything was a TV show, man.
Right. So I just think you add all that thing up, and it was a dramatic perfect storm. Every misstep that had to be made to make it where we sit today was kind of made to a large degree. I still remember August 3rd, going to bed that night, being somewhat optimistic. Maybe there's a chance. Wake up in the morning and you're like, the Apple deal is going to get done.
Yeah.
And then an hour later, it all fell apart. So I think there's blame to the media partners. Like, nobody stepped up and tried to save the league. Obviously, they made their choices, and maybe that's part of the economy, part of decisions. Who knows? And then you go to revisionist history, and George Kliavkoff in his first month, this was reported that the Big 12 and the Pac-12 talked about merging leagues.
Right.
Like, so I think there's a lot. There's a hierarchy of academia. There's the accepting of that and thinking that is still proven true. There's the reality of this is kind of a professional thing when it comes to football that may or may not break away from the NCAA. There's a lot to it, man, to give the blame. But I think at the end of the day, it's where we are. And it's also sad where we are, because it's a 108-year-old league, and there's a part of the country that is now relatively void of a large voice, which is why I started Y Option.
So one thing we want to do here. So we're Kings of the North, and we want to pull these West Coast, like northern schools, and make them part of us, right? So we want to welcome Oregon and Washington and Colorado and Utah. Say, hey, like, we think Ohio State and Michigan and West Virginia and Iowa State and Minnesota and Iowa, there's maybe some cultural stuff we can have in common. But can there remain a West Coast vibe, a West Coast culture to college football without a conference to be the foundation of it? Your Y Option, Substack, and podcast, is that correct?
Yep.
It's up to you. Yogi's gonna keep it alive, but like, how do you do that without a conference? Because a culture and a conference are related, but they're not the exact same thing, especially in a world where conferences don't make any sense geographically anymore. But geographically, you can still have a vibe to how people think about the game, right?
Think about it 10 years ago. Did we ever talk about conferences? Not really. Like, it was never like, it was Ohio State and Michigan. It was Bama and Clemson and Florida State. It was SC and Oregon. Like, the conference thing to me came about when the media rights conversations came about. And all of a sudden people are aware of grants of rights and these terms that none of us ever said 10 years ago. So I think it's the vibe, yes, will exist, because it does exist, and it'll exist in the Big Ten. I'm going to be calling games on the Big Ten network every single week, and I can't wait. And there will be a West Coast vibe. Like, Oregon's not going to become Midwest in terms of an ideology. USC is not going to do that. I think it's going to be a beautiful blend. I really believe in that. But to your point of conference culture, there's also community. Mm-hmm. And that's why over the course of the last season, I was workshopping it as I was calling games on the West Coast of, hey, Arizona, how are you going to tell stories next year? Hey, USC, hey, Cal. And as you all bolt to these different conferences, how are you going to make sure that the stories of your athletes and your teams are going to be told at a really high level? And they said, we don't really know. I said, okay, there's some white space here. And then I think about the schools that you just referenced up north. How are they going to learn about the schools out west? And I said, we can create something. And I've spent 20 years, hopefully building trust within this fan base on the West Coast, or people like yourselves from other regions say, want to learn about the West Coast, let's call Yogi. So I said, let's create something. So that's where we birthed Y Option, which is college football through the lens of the West Coast. So we'll talk about Minnesota when they play UCLA. We'll talk about all of the schools around the country. We'll talk about Baylor when they're playing Arizona, but it's going to be through the lens of the West Coast, because I think that's what gets lost. LA people have a totally different vibe of Alabama football or of Ohio State football than people who live in Tuscaloosa or where you live in Columbus.
We're lensing. We're North lensing here. You're West lensing. But look at this.
It's a great,
we can lens together.
We're gonna.
I want to talk about some pods of Pac-12 teams, because and like where their heads are at, their fans are at. All right, let's talk about Oregon and Washington. Pacific Northwest, highly successful in football, coming to the Big Ten. And I like to sort of play this game of, I do think sometimes, I mean, it's terrible that a 100-year-old league died. It stinks. But sometimes we can, in a lot of things, doom and gloom and talk about and the ball is great. Your ball, right?
Yeah, how great is ball?
How great is ball? Oregon and Washington, can they be okay? It's going to be different, but can they be okay? Can their fans still enjoy the game? How do you think this transformation will be for Oregon and Washington fans?
I love the question. So let's just stay in the Big Ten, because I think it's a different conversation in the ACC
Yes.
or in the Big 12.
Okay.
If we're going to be real, two leagues have separated themselves in sports. The whole world understands that. Brett Yormark even said that yesterday. And as he said, we're firmly number 3. Like everybody's kind of deferred to the SEC and Big Ten, the Big Ten, the SEC, however you want to argue who's 1 or who's 2. I say that because I think that's really exciting. And Jed Fish said a line that I think made a lot of sense, where he goes, it's kind of like the NFL now, whereas you're going every weekend into a stadium that's going to be sold out, into an opponent who can beat you. And it's probably going to come down to the very end of a game and the decisions made by a quarterback or a defense or whatever. And then if you have 3 losses at the end of the season in that league, in the Big Ten or the SEC, you're going to have a real shot to get to the playoff. And I think that's a beautiful analogy, because it does feel like the NFL. It's the NFC West with Oregon and Washington. It's only 2 teams.
Yep.
But that's what it is right now. And you could add in the 2 in Southern California if you wanted to. And I love that. And maybe we'll get there. Maybe there'll be divisions within these super conferences over the course of the next couple of years as realignment comes again. But they will fit in beautifully.
Okay.
Now, will it be easy travel-wise? I think it's a conversation.
Got to talk about it. Yeah.
Because kids still go to school. Like, it's not that they're not professional, even though they're making some of them more money than even professionals are. But they're not. They still have to balance. They're still 18 to 22. It's still challenging to make sure that you can focus like a quote unquote pro, even though you're not.
Yep.
But God, I'm bullish on him, man. Dan Lanning, a huge fan. I knew him when he was a GA at Pitt, at Arizona State, and look at him now. He is going to be, because there's space now. Nick Saban retired.
Absolutely.
Who's the face of college football? Dan Lanning, to me, is about to take up a lot of real estate. Jim Harbaugh no longer around, as we all know. Oregon is not slowing down. They're going to go into that league and they'll be right at the top, and they'll be in the conversation for everything for years to come.
I think Oregon and Washington can be in a very good spot. The LA schools, they're kind of hanging out down there. Certainly that's a different vibe than a Midwestern, Northern kind of feel in the Big Ten. Can there be some advantages that USC and UCLA can take advantage of in Southern California? They both need to raise their game. But can they be okay? Or is this going to be a little weird?
Well, I think when you look at the 18 teams in the league, like, everybody can't win, right?
Yes.
Here we are in media days and everybody thinks they're going to win. And there's reason for optimism. I mean, I studied the Big Ten all off season. I accepted a job. I'm going to call games there. And I'm like, all right, let's really throw down. You start studying Nebraska and who they could be this year.
Yeah.
Minnesota and who they were last year. Illinois and the close games they had last year. Indiana, and with this new staff and the new players, there's not going to be a layup win for anybody. So it will be a challenge for all the schools, I think, involved. With that said, for these 2 schools, number 1, it's going to be great for the other 16, or really especially the other 14, coming out to LA when they can, opening up recruiting doors that maybe Purdue didn't have in Southern California. And vice versa for the 2 schools in LA, just having even more of a national brand. And there's so much talent around them. When you look at the 2, I think they're 2 different conversations. USC is entering year 3 with Lincoln Riley. We know who Lincoln Riley is. We know what this offense will be. They've got the best receiving core. You could argue at least one of the tops in the Big Ten, if not the country, with the explosive playmakers they have. I think Miller Moss will be great. Totally new staff on the defense, except 1 coach. We'll see what this defense looks like. I don't know if there's a first rounder, true difference maker on that side of the ball, but they're going to have to evolve. We'll see. I don't know if this is a year where they will go to the playoff. I look at this as a really foundational year for them. Okay. And then for the Bruins, you got Deshaun Foster. Huge fan of Deshaun. We're tracking him his whole time there. Spent a bunch of time at UCLA this offseason. And he's done a beautiful job of being a young coach who's open and curious. I think sometimes young coaches are closed and arrogant. Ooh. He's not that. He is seeking counsel. He's not afraid of dialogue. And this team is really connected. The most time you have turnover from a head coach and you've turnover on your roster, that didn't happen, right? He basically got promoted from within. The guys love him. It's a new system on offense with Eric Bieniemy, longtime NFL coach. It'll be pro style. It'll be West Coast. Ethan Garbers, he can deal. He's really got a tremendous acumen around the game and the craft. Defensively, they kept their best player in Jay Toia. He's a defensive lineman who was in the portal for a minute, came on back. He's probably their true #1 player, NFL style player on the defensive line. So I don't project them to get 10 wins, but they're not going to get 2. It's going to be a hard out. They'll be in that conversation of the Minnesotas, the Nebraskas, the Illinois. I think that's where they sit probably year 1.
Colorado and Utah. Can they be as good, maybe better, I don't know, of a cultural football fit in the Big 12 compared to where they were in the Pac-12? I mean, they're not traditionally long-term Pac-12 teams. Can Colorado and Utah in this new world be okay?
Yeah, I think they'll be fine. I mean, I think for Colorado, I think over 50% of their enrollment or applications come from California, majority Southern California. So it always felt like they were a Pac-12 vibe.
Okay.
Like you go to campus there and you feel like you're kind of in SoCal, especially when it's a beautiful sunny day. Like it has that feel to it. I think for Utah, because we kind of saw their come up, right? It's not like they were in the Big 12 before this. I mean, they had to truly come up, and we watched them. And I would say this, in my 12 years at the Pac-12 network, in the 13 years in the Pac-12, they were probably the most complete team in totality. So, I mean, we just watched this train just continue to ascend under Kyle Whittingham. They're not going to slow down. So they could fit anywhere. I think they would have been a great fit in the Big 10, to be honest with you. But they'll come in, and I think they're going to make a ton of noise in the Big 12. I think Colorado, there's the nostalgia in the Big 12. I think of Big 12, I still think of Nebraska. They haven't been there in over a decade. Right? I still think of A&M and, of course, Texas and OU. So I think there'll be something nice there. They'll recruit Texas. They always have recruited Texas well. And then Deion with the Texas vibes. Like it's a whole thing. So they'll be just fine. I think for Colorado, it's probably better in terms of an opportunity to win. I mean, they didn't win anything in the Pac-12. They had 1 year where they had success. So I think it's a great opportunity for them and how they're trying to rebuild that thing there.
Last group I'll ask you about, Oregon State and Washington State. It's terrible what happened to them. But could they exist in a world, could they look at Boise State and what Boise State has been and try to be the best group of 5 program in the country and not have to try to compete with USC and Oregon every year? And for them to be left like this, again, is terrible. But could there be a silver lining of we're going to sort of adjust our world, still try to be great, but we're not banging our head against the USC and Oregon wall anymore, and let's go try to take that group of 5 spot in the playoff every year?
Yeah, when realignment was happening, every conversation I had with the respective head coaches at the time at both schools led with that. Go be Boise.
Go be Boise.
Go win 12 games.
Okay.
Go win 11 games. Who cares? Because I think we're in an era, and that's what the expanded playoff, thankfully,
yes,
it's here. It's great that it's here. And I think this year specifically, these 2 schools, and I think Wazoo right now, from what I know about the teams, I put them a little bit of a higher rung ahead of Oregon State. I think Washington State, they didn't lose a lot of guys to the portal. I mean, this team is pretty loaded under Jake Dickert. They had a UW team in September that is totally rebuilding in Washington. They got a chance to win that game. And I really believe, I'm hosting they're doing a really cool media night tonight. It's called After Hours, the Cougs and Beeves.
Oh,
it's
nice.
like 90 minutes. There's going to be about 70 media members there. You should come if you want. It's going to be really fun tonight at the Bellagio. And I say that I think they're going to be in our business. We don't get to root for teams, but if we did,
yes,
everybody's pulling for those 2.
Yes.
Because they got dramatically hosed and it was no fault of theirs. They actually won. Both are ranked in the top 15 last year. I mean, it's not like they haven't been to a bowl game. They haven't sent out draft picks. They had first rounder at Oregon State this year. They had second rounder last year at Wazoo. So I think everybody's pulling for them. And they got a chance to make some noise, man. And then we'll see. If the ACC falls apart, maybe Cal and Stanford come back. You pick up a Boise, you pick up a San Diego State. I think there's a world where you can kind of rebuild a West Coast league. And then in 5 years, when these media rights are kind of timing out, let's see what UCLA thinks. Let's see what a streamer thinks. Like, I think the goal is to stay competitive, keep the doors open, but also they know by the end of the season, there's got to be a relative plan that isn't dependent upon chaos from somebody else.
People who want the West Coast lens, tell them exactly how they can get you, Yogi, with the Y option.
Just go to yoption.com. It's really simple. Wherever you listen to podcasts, we're going to be written on Substack. We're going to be audio. We're going to be video. Then I'm going to be calling games all year long in the Big Ten Network. So we'll be all over, but yoption.com is the home for now.
So you are sort of going to be like the West Coast voice of the Big Ten Network?
You know, it's been great. And they've been, I've been so lucky to get that job there. I'm going to go all across the country.
Oh,
I'm going to start.
awesome.
My first game is going to be at Oregon. Second game is going to be at SC. Third game at Nebraska.
Okay.
All right, I'm going on a training camp tour to Penn State and to Rutgers and to Maryland and Ohio State. I'll be in your town. So they've been awesome in that regard because the people that have worked there for so long, they also want to get out to the West Coast.
Yeah.
And I want to see what it's like in other parts of the country. And I'm a Pennsylvania guy. It's where I grew up. So I kind of grew up in the Big Ten country. So it'll be fun for me to kind of dive back into those initial roots.
The most optimistic man in America? Is that fair to say?
I'll say this: at the core of optimism is resilience. So yeah, I hope somebody says that about me, man. I'd love that.
No, I think so. We did the mock committee exercise for the college football playoffs a couple of years ago, and Yogi is a great guy to be in the room with, man. So welcome.
Thanks. Man.
I'm sorry what happened. It's the circumstances that brought you to us are not ideal, but this is good for Big Ten fans to get a little Yogi Roth in their life, man.
I hope it's a lot of Yogi Roth in their life, man. I'm excited to join. I'll see you at Big Ten Media Days. And hey, congrats on everything. You've been really cool to stay connected, and I'm looking forward. I know we'll probably talk a lot more now, just with the role that I'm going to have in the Big Ten.
West Lens, North Lens, we bring it all together and make everybody happy. Yogi, thanks for joining us, man. Appreciate it. Joined now by Andy Yamashita, who covers Washington for the Seattle Times and is also a graduate of UW, correct?
Yeah. I graduated from UW in 2021. Worked a couple places, interned a couple places, and now I'm back in Seattle.
So you understand Washington fans.
I hope so. I would hope so at this point.
So my question is how are Washington fans? Like, are they okay? Is this driving them crazy that they are now in the Big Ten? How's the adjustment?
Man, I mean, even beyond the Big Ten move, Washington fans have just gone through so much.
Yeah.
Going back to even, they were playing in the national championship in January. 2 days later, their coach who, UW fans thought Kalen DeBoer could be the guy forever. Everyone always compares. Every Washington coach will always get compared to Don James.
Yeah.
And, Don James turned down Ohio State. He did all this stuff. He stayed at Washington. And so Washington fans certainly thought Kalen DeBoer was going to be that guy, 25-3 in 2 seasons, takes him to a national championship game after the kind of craziness of the Jimmy Lake era, going through COVID. He gets fired before the second year ends. Chris Peterson had just retired unexpectedly. I mean, Washington fans have been through a lot in the last, 5 years, multiple head coaches, multiple athletic directors. The turnover has been crazy. So even with the Big Ten move coming, I think that they're still a little bit in shell shock from everything that's happened since January.
Yeah.
I mean, even, Jed Fish gets hired within a couple of days after DeBoer leaves. It's been a wild ride. And then you throw on top conference realignment. I believe this is the first time Washington has moved conferences since being a charter member of the PCC, which is the 3 iterations before the Pac-12.
Right.
Back in 1916. So this is a huge move for Washington and just in the historic scape of the school's history.
So,
and, you're losing your traditional rival in Washington State. They've done things to keep that rivalry going, right? They're going to play across the next 5 years. They're going to keep playing, and they've said they're going to maintain that rivalry.
They have to.
They have to. And the Apple Cup means a lot to people in Washington, right? It's a real good way to kind of get that East-West rivalry out. I don't know how much you know about the geography of the state, but Western Washington, that's Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia. That's where the big cities are. I think it's something like 75% of all the people in the state live on the west side of the state.
Okay.
The east side, then there's a mountain range in the middle. And then the east side, which is where Washington State is, that's Spokane, that's Pullman. And it's a very different part of the state. It's almost like 2 different states kind of smashed into one. And so the Apple Cup has traditionally been this great way for the East-West rivalry to play out in the state. It's a great way for the people in the rural part of the state to kind of, when Washington State wins, get that one up on the City Slickers. Washington certainly has kind of a superiority complex to Washington State. We're the flagship school. We're the school in the city. We represent the west side of the state. So, you're losing that rivalry potentially, at least in the context of it's not a conference rivalry anymore. Right? Like Washington State was already, had less resources. Now it's going to have even less.
Right.
It's going to be much less of an even playing field. So I think there's a lot of sadness about that maybe people outside the state don't understand how important that rivalry was to people.
But let me interrupt you here. So Iowa and Iowa State aren't in the same conference. They play every year. Clemson and South Carolina play every year. Georgia finishes the year with Georgia Tech. We have this history. There are a lot of places out there where there are geographical, natural, historic rivalries that are not conference affiliated that are valued and played every year. And I think Oregon State, and Washington State have to fit under that category. And it's great that Washington and Washington State are doing this for the next 5 years, but they have to do it for the next 100 years.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you think there's any risk of the administrations or somebody getting mad or whatever? Or would it even be like, would the governor and the state legislature and that kind of thing step in? Because Washington and Washington State have to play every year.
I think that I don't think that there's any threat about them not playing right now. I think what's really worrying is more that there could be in the future, right? Maybe down the road, 15 years from now, a Washington athletic director says, we don't really need this. Or, Washington State gets back in the Power 5 and says, like, you guys left us, we're back, we don't need you, or something like that. I think it's when they're in the same conference, there's no threat of that. You're going to have to play every year, get over it. Like, it's kind of like that. I don't know how online you are, but
I'm old.
The meme of where the two kids in the get along shirt, you'll have to look it up. But that's kind of what it is, right? Like when you're in the same conference, it's like you're gonna have to face each other. Doesn't matter how you feel about it. I think it's more like the worry is, what if someday it happens? Right? I think Texas A&M is the perfect example of that, right? Like,
but people in Texas need to learn to get along better.
I don't want to get into that.
We will get into it. Texas, make friends.
Yeah. So, we'll see what happens, but I think I would hope that they played for a long time. Again, it's such an important rivalry in that state that, I get a lot of emails from Washington fans who are sad that they're leaving Washington State. They want to play that game every year. That game means a lot to people in the state every year. So I think there's some sadness about that, because this was all about the Big Ten. We got a little off track, but there's some sadness about that. I think just generally there's not always a total understanding of how athletic departments work, the importance of the media rights, stuff like that. I personally think that the Apple deal was kind of untenable. There were too many question marks, with budgets and the way they work. You want stability, you want known numbers, right? I'd rather take an amount on the table that I know I'll get every year versus it could be anywhere in this range, right?
Yeah.
Which is what the Apple deal kind of could have been like. So I think there's a lot of feelings about it. I'm certain there's some worries that, you come to the Big Ten and all of a sudden you're irrelevant, right? Like Washington fans like to think, whether it's true or not, that they belong in that top echelon of college football teams, right?
Yeah.
They've had a lot of success. They're the second most successful Pac-12 team after USC in football. So I think there's a certain expectation that they should be good. They should be competitive. But then you see like Penn State, a team that is always good every year. We just heard Franklin talk about, right? You win 10 games at Penn State and it's kind of a failure because they can't get over that Michigan, Ohio State.
We're going to change that, but we all have to change that. And I think the 12-team playoff will help change that, but we have to get over that, because I think, and the media is part of it, but we can't be in a national title or bust world for every single program in the country. But I think there's absolutely a spot for Washington to slide right in, right? Maybe you're not Ohio State, maybe you're not Michigan. If USC gets it back going again, but there's a spot for Washington to slide in the top half, in the top 6 in this conference that I think is very realistic. But what we want to do is welcome the West to the North. This is Kings of the North. And I think the sport is dividing North-South. And so as much as it's terrible, it is terrible that there is not a traditional geographic major West Coast conference now. But that's not the way it divided. We didn't divide East-West. We divided North-South. So North, you're with us now. But how much different is it really? Washington has to play Oregon every year, and Washington has to play Washington State every year. So take care of that. Is it that much different for Washington fans to play Michigan and Minnesota and Penn State and Maryland than it was to play Arizona and Arizona State and Colorado and Utah and Stanford and Cal and UCLA and USC? Like, I understand you want your local stuff, but I hope Washington as a program and a fan base can find happiness playing Minnesota, because what's so great about playing Arizona State?
It's funny that you brought up Arizona and Arizona State first, because I think that's the road trip that every Pac-12 school that's leaving them is so glad to not have anymore.
Okay.
Like the joke, right, when everyone jokes about Pac-12 after dark, it should really be Pac-12 after dark in the desert. Because Oregon and Washington both, right? Like in the years that USC was down, Oregon and Washington kind of ran the conference. And every single time, right, the joke was, right, the Pac-12 can never get in the playoff. Partially that was because of the 9-game conference season, right? That 9th conference game is much harder than getting an 8th, I don't want to say cupcake team, but like a non FCS team.
Do you want to
something
tell
like
the
that.
SEC to cram it because they only play 8? Do you want to say it? I'll say it. The SEC can cram it.
I think the one that Washington fans might actually be kind of sad to lose is Cal. Like Cal and Washington are charter members of the PCC together.
Okay.
Cal is in the Washington fight song. The Washington fight song's like 3 verses, but they only do the first one, I think. And the third verse is specifically talking about how they want to beat Cal.
Really?
Yeah, it's
Can they
kind of
change that to how they want to beat Rutgers? We'll make an adjustment to the lyrics.
Scarlet Knights, Golden Bears, right? Like
Yeah.
it's kind of the same thing. I don't know exactly the lyrics, but like there is like a kind of long history there with Cal.
Is Washington and its fans, are they going to be okay? Is this going to be okay, or is this going to be not as good, not as fun? And you had some really good questions, and I would direct everyone. I'm sure you're writing good stories about it, about the financial situation for Washington and all those things. But fans don't care about that. Fans just like want to talk about ball. Is it going to be okay, or is there risk here for when it comes to the happiness of Washington football fans?
I think it has to be okay with them. They have to be okay with it. Like again, I don't think Washington had another path forward.
Okay,
That's just my personal opinion, but I think they're gonna have to be okay with it. And again, like in 5 years, maybe this will be regular and this won't be a big deal. And maybe we'll only have 2 conferences by then. Who knows what'll happen like by next year?
yeah.
So I think they kind of have to be okay with it. And the one thing and we talked about this before, but the one thing I don't think people outside Seattle or even outside the Pacific Northwest maybe don't understand is Washington is really important to the city. It's one of the only major universities, Power 5 universities, that's located in a major city that still draws comparable numbers to the Seahawks and the Mariners. And, there are pro sports teams in Seattle, and Seattle itself loves Washington. So I think there's at least a nostalgic connection between Washington and Seattle that will carry them through these first couple years. The question is, if you get to year 5 and you've never been better than, let's say, 7th in the conference, then you start asking questions, right? Like, do people keep showing up? If the Seahawks get really good again, maybe there's a loss of interest there or something like that. But I think for the most part, I think Washington fans will be okay, and they have to be with what's going on in college football right now. But it'll be interesting, and there's a lot of love for that team in that city. And I think that, again, I don't know if people outside the Pacific Northwest know that.
All right. Our producer, Mike, sent the lyrics. Bring the golden bear from his mighty lair, for we're going to hang his carcass in the Northland. And when we snare the golden bear, you'll never carry it back to California. See the golden bear with the glassy stare. Well, he knows he'll be a dead one in the morning.
Yeah, they don't sing that one anymore. But I told you it's in there.
When we snare the Scarlet Knight, when we snare the Spartan, when we snare the Terrapin, we just have to adjust these. This is actually, I would like to read a story about this. When you are no longer in the same conference as the fight song is written about how much you hate this person, I would like to see an adjustment here.
Yeah, and it's also funny again because I don't even know how many Washington fans really know that. I just thought it was funny because again, I grew up in Berkeley. And
he knows he'll be a dead one in the morning. Yeah. Okay, watch out for Washington fans, everybody. We're glad to have him in the Big Ten. I think they'll be okay. Have an open mind about it and keep the geographic rivalries. And I think like it becomes one of those things when conferences are no longer geographic, then you have to use your non-conference to keep the geographic stuff that you can keep. So I think we have examples of programs doing it well. We have examples of programs not doing it well, Texas and Texas A&M. But don't be like Texas and Texas A&M. They can't even like keep their power on when it's below 30 degrees. So like, don't follow them. Follow everybody else who's figured it out. He's Andy Yamashita. You can follow his coverage of Washington at the Seattle Times. And thanks for joining us on Kings of the North.
Thanks for having me, man. I hope to be back soon.
You will be. So thanks again to Yogi and Andy for joining us here on Kings of the North. By the time you guys watch this, basically everybody in college football will have started their first practice on Thursday morning, and it makes Bill Landis the happiest lad in all the land.
Yeah, I get to go watch Ohio State practice on Thursday. I can't wait. Thursday and Friday.
And we would like to get out on the road a little bit and get eyeballs on a couple other teams. I will say I have a plan to get some eyeballs on Penn State this weekend. I think we're going to get some eyeballs on Cincinnati next week, and then we might just get in the car and drive around into whoever will have us. And because obviously it gives you a better sense of what people are talking about when you can see it a little bit firsthand. I did it with one school in the spring with Boston College, and I felt like I came away with a much better handle on what's happening with the Eagles. And so the two teams that I think the three teams probably that we really would be interested in hitting, because we did have conversations at Big 12 and Big 10 media days with our northern teams. Notre Dame, not in a conference. We'd like to get some eyeballs on Notre Dame. And then Syracuse and Pitt in the ACC. We couldn't get to ACC media days because they were the same time as the Big 10. As I said, I did get to Boston College in the spring, but it'd be nice to see the Orange and the Panthers up close, Bill.
Yeah, we'll like to see those for sure. Want to see Kyle McCord. Notre Dame is the big one, though. I'd like to get to South Bend before the season starts to figure out what's going on with them, because they're interesting and potentially a playoff team. So we need to get more info.
We got a meeting. We're doing stuff. More is coming. More is coming. More is coming. So stick with Kings of the North. We appreciate everybody who has been here, and tell a friend, because we're just getting started. Thanks as always to our producer, Mike Yorostowski, for making us look good and sound good. He's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.